There we go. Okay. Okay. Can you all see the presentation okay?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. Wonderful. Okay. So hello, my name is Jesse, and thank you, Noah, for the invitation to speak here today. And thank you also for attending this presentation to all of you watching. Today, we'll learn how to connect poetry to statistical analysis, two seemingly different fields. More specifically, we're going to talk about a method used in natural language processing, information retrieval, and machine learning. This method involves the statistical scheme, term frequency, inverse document frequency. During my presentation, you may hear me say TF, which is short for term frequency, IDF, which is short for inverse document frequency, and TF-IDF, which is short for term frequency, inverse document frequency. TF-IDF is the product of the two statistics, TF and IDF. TF regards how often a given term appears in a given document. IDF regards how rarely a given term appears across the document collection, so as to decrease the importance of a given term as the number of documents in which it shows up increases. The product of these two statistics helps us to measure the importance attached to given terms within a given document relative to the document collection. I first learned about TF-IDF while interning for NASA in grad school. I applied TF-IDF to different goals and objectives for NASA when compared to what we'll talk about today, but my hope is that after today, you'll begin to see how what is relevant in a more quantitative environment, like at NASA, can also be relevant in a more qualitative environment, such as in an English class. While my training is in the programming language R, I utilized exploratory for this presentation. Instead of R, which can have a rather steep learning curve, I utilized exploratory, which is more user-friendly and can work with R, because I want the introductory skills that we'll learn today to be accessible for those with quantitative backgrounds, but also and perhaps especially those with qualitative backgrounds, like my fellow poets. To begin, we need to first decide which documents we'll analyze. The document collection is called the corpus. I went ahead and chose for us which documents will make up the corpus. We'll analyze a collection of Edgar Allan Poe's poems entitled Poems of Later Life. Poe's poems of later life are freely accessible from Project Gutenberg. To access the text, you can scan the QR code on the slide. For those unaware, Project Gutenberg is a digital library that provides free ebooks. And fun fact, the founder of Project Gutenberg, Michael Hart, invented the ebook in 1971. There are a total of 19 poems or documents in the corpus. The chosen poems are 1, The Raven, 2, The Bells, 3, Ulalume, 4, To Helen, 5, Annabel Lee, 6, A Valentine, 7, An Enigma, 8, To My Mother, 9, For Annie, 10, To F, 11, To Francis S. Osgood, 12, El Dorado, 13, Eulalie, 14, A Dream Within a Dream, 15, To Mary Louise Shoe, 16, another poem also called To Mary Louise Shoe, 17, The City and the Sea, 18, The Sleeper, and 19, Bridal Ballad. You may have noticed that poems 15 and 16 are both titled To Mary Louise Shoe. For our analysis, we'll refer to poem 15 as To Mary Louise Shoe 1 and poem 16 as To Mary Louise Shoe 2. But first, we need to prepare the text data for text mining. Text mining is a process that analyzes large sets of text data, but with algorithms to extract information, patterns, and relationships, especially those that are latent within the set of text data. On this screen, we see that set of text data, i.e. the corpus, that I have imported into Exploratory. The file is a CSV text file local to my laptop. The poems are ordered the same as they are by Project Gutenberg. Next, I wrangled the text, which is just a fun way to say that I made it so that none of the names were too long to read on the screen. The names are the poem's titles. After that, I tokenized the text. To tokenize a text is to break it down. Therefore, tokenization dismantles the text into words, phrases, sentences, and the like. For our analysis, we'll especially focus on terms. Terms are words taken from each document or poem. The tokens are then placed into cells, with each token occupying one cell per row. You may notice that some characters are not English characters. This is okay. It won't significantly affect the output. Non-English characters can appear when the text is transferred from Project Gutenberg to the local CSV text file, and then from the local CSV text file to exploratory. Regardless, on this slide, we see columns for not only name and token, but also sentence ID and document ID. The sentence ID is simply the ordered sentence within which the token is found. For example, all tokens with a sentence ID of 1 are found in the poem's first sentence. The document ID is the poem, as ordered by Project Gutenberg. For example, document ID 1 refers to the Raven because the Raven is the first poem in Project Gutenberg's collection. Next, we can see on this chart the total number of tokens or words within each document or poem. For example, we can see that the Raven has the most at 570. However, we don't want to keep all tokens gathered. Some tokens, especially stop words, do not add value. They are noisy. We want to clean up this noise so that the data are less messy and easier to understand in the final analysis. Stop words are terms that do not help us to identify a document. For example, the token chamber, which we'll see later on, helps us to identify the Raven, but other tokens like and, of, the, and to are too generic to help us identify the document. As a result of removing stop words, the unique value of tokens will decrease from 1,470 down to 1,390. Next, we'll look at the pivot table and then clean up the data so that it is alphabetized. Alphabetized means that the text data are neither alphanumeric nor numeric. The text data are only alphabetic. This step is perhaps a bit precautionary in case any numbers, for example, enter the set of text data when the text is transferred from Project Gutenberg to the local CSV text file. After we alphabetize the set of text data, we should see an output like this, which shows only the alphabet tokens. After ensuring only the alphabet tokens, we want to work with and mutate the text data. We want to conduct stemming. Stemming is the process of regressing words to the basic form that is common to all inflected variants. For example, after alphabetizing the set of text data, one of our tokens is distinctly, found in sentence 3 of document 1, the Raven. Distinctly is not the most basic form of the token. The most basic form is distinct, which we now see as tokenized from sentence 3 of document 1. Stemming helps to make sure that there is no double counting. Now, after stemming, we see that bell, singular, is the most common token, whereas it used to be bells, plural. Next, we want to construct n-grams, which in natural language processing is to concatenate words next to each other. This falls within text mining, which involves the discovery of latent information. Monogram and unigram are both an n-gram token created from one word unlinked to other words. Bigram and digram are both an n-gram token created from 2 words linked. Trigram is an n-gram token created from 3 words linked. For our set of text data, we only see mono and bigrams like door and midnight dreary, found in document 1. Midnight dreary is latent because the human mind does not observe midnight and dreary as concatenate but separate terms. The computer identifies them as concatenate with greater value added from the concatenate term than the separate terms. Admittedly, though, knowing which terms to concatenate can be difficult for the computer at times, and so error can occur. Caution should be exercised when noticing concatenated tokens like bell observably concatenated here. It is not entirely obvious that the bigram bell adds more value than the product of 2 times the value added from the unigram bell. Regardless, to stay within boundary, which is to say, to only connect words within the same sentence, we must select the document ID as well as the sentence ID when constructing n-grams. This concludes our preparing the text data for text analysis. Now that we have prepared the text data for text analysis, we'll quantify the qualitative. That is, we will calculate the TF-IDF values and unearth the most important terms per document. As a refresher, TF-IDF is a weighting mechanism that calculates the importance of each term for each document by increasing the importance based on the term frequency, while decreasing the importance based on the document frequency. Here we see the TF-IDF values per term analyzed. However, when we ask the computer to calculate the TF-IDF values, we lose the names of the different documents. We want this information back so that our output is easier to understand in the final analysis. Otherwise, how do we know for certain that document 1 is The Raven and not any of the other 18 poems analyzed in the corpus? We don't. To get back the document names, we create a branch data frame from the main data frame. The branch data frame will branch out from the step right before our losing the names. Since we only need to identify each document ID according to its respective name, the branch data frame only needs to include those 2 columns, but not before removing any duplicated rows so that we keep only unique rows. Now that we have the name column back, it's important to notice that it's only back within the branch data frame. To get it back within the main data frame, we must have the main data frame target the branch data frame, so that the data observable within the branch data frame but unobservable within the main data frame also become observable within the main data frame. This process is called joining. After joining, we now have the name column back within the main data frame. Now that we've returned to the main data frame, let's continue where we left off. After asking the computer to calculate the TF-IDF values, we see 3 new columns. The count per doc column indicates the term frequency value per term. That is, it indicates how many times each term appears in each document. For example, we see that the term chamber in row 8 appears 11 times in document 1, The Raven. However, if the term appears in only 1 document across the corpus, then it doesn't help us to find similarities like patterns and relationships between all documents in the final analysis. For example, we ought to filter out the term nevermore because it only appears in document 1 even if 11 times. Therefore, we want to filter the count of docs metric to include only values greater than 1. The count of docs column dictates the document frequency value per term. That is, it indicates how many documents a given term appears in. For example, the same term, chamber, appears in 2 documents, 11 times in document 1, The Raven, and if we search for the data, 2 more times in document 18, The Sleeper. The TF-IDF column indicates the TF-IDF value for each term per document. For example, in document 1, the term chamber has a TF-IDF value of 1.996. A lower TF-IDF value indicates a term that is more frequent across the corpus, whereas a higher TF-IDF value indicates a term that is less frequent across the corpus. For example, the TF-IDF value of chamber is high, indicating that it is perhaps common in 1 or 2 documents, but not the corpus at large, which we know to be true. Now let's see how many unique tokens there are per document, minus stop words. For example, we see that document 1, The Raven, has 161 unique tokens. However, let's look more closely at the data. We now see how many times each of document 1's 161 unique tokens appear in The Raven. For example, we see that in the chart, only one unique token appears a total of 11 times in the poem. Based on our analysis of the table before, we know that this term is chamber. Last, let's return to the table. Let's filter the TF-IDF column to keep only the top and bottom 20 tokens. First, let's look at the bottom 20. We see a pattern. The same words are repeated. They are now, night, heaven, heart, eye, and soul. When writing a critical theory paper, for example, an English student can utilize these data to understand that while these terms are not important to identify any one poem, they do nevertheless help to understand the meaning behind the corpus at large. We can verify that these terms are not important to identify any one document because of their low TF-IDF values, like now, which has a TF-IDF value of 0.214. On the other hand, with the top 20, we see 29 tokens, only 3 of which, fancy, leave, and roll, are duplicated. When writing a critical theory paper, an English student can utilize these data to understand that these terms are important to identify the documents in which they appear. That is, they help less to understand the meaning behind the corpus at large, but more to help to understand the meaning behind individual poems. We can verify that these terms are important to identify their respective documents because of their high TF-IDF values. For example, fancy, which has a TF-IDF value of 1.444. Thank you for attending this presentation. Feel free to email me any thoughts, questions, or epiphanies you might have. And also feel free to scan the QR code on this slide to connect with me on LinkedIn. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jesse. All right, that was, well, 15 minutes exactly. Okay, great. Fascinating. Yeah. All right, so on to Calvin Olson. So Calvin Olson is a senior lecturer in the English department at Ohio State University, where he teaches courses on monsters and/or new media production. He recently completed his PhD in the Communication Rhetoric and Digital Media program at NC State. Congratulations. And he moonlights as an internationally published poet and award-winning literary translator. Calvin, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Noah. And Jesse, that was phenomenal. You and I, if you ever want to write a paper together, I'm your man. My presentation is going to be a lot of applied pedagogical versions of really stupid versions of what Jesse is doing very smartly. So I outsource a lot of my quantitative work and a lot of my creative work. So I just, as a preamble, I guess, for this, I'm very much in the space right now of curation and of putting things together a la Frankenstein's monster, where things already exist, and finding ways to put them together in interesting ways is kind of, yeah, where my creative and academic and pedagogical space are sitting. So I'm going to share, I'm going to go in and out of this, which I'm sorry if that's annoying. I'm going to share this thing just so we've got it. And then I'm going to take it off once in a while and look around. Okay, can everybody see? Yeah, scream if you can't see it. Okay. Also, these pictures are all from unsplash.com. If you're not familiar, it's a great place to get free, really amazing artwork, which you can or cannot give kudos for. So it's a great website. I didn't put a lot of the tech side of things. So if any tools I use or ideas that I have, you want to know where they come from, please just feel free to ask. So my presentation is called Obeisance Meaty. I'm looking at 3D remediations of the Raven. So I'm looking specifically at this particular poem. So there are many in pop culture and otherwise, there are many remediations or retellings of the Raven. It's basic. I mean, it's the poem that made Poe famous, essentially. And by so doing, if you haven't seen the Simpsons version of the Raven, please leave this meeting and go watch it instead. So it is, yeah. Anyways, it's a really fantastic poem. It is one of the ones I think that's still taught in schools, right? It's got that really fascinating, phenomenal kind of almost nursery rhyme type cadence to it, and it's just really great. So what I was looking to do was to do a bit of like a data analysis. I don't know why that's cut off. This is a Raven. There's a 3D model of it, which I'll show you a version of pretty soon. So for my presentation, I set out to do 3 things. I'm just going to be honest and say I did 2 of them and I failed really hard at the 3rd one. But it still works in a lot of ways. So like I said, I outsourced the analysis of the poem using digital tools. I'll show you the one that I use. It's the one I used in class, and it's the one that I've kind of grown fond of myself as a person who I've taken 3 or 4 courses on data mining and text mining, and the math does not stick in my brain. So I will probably outsource forever, but that's okay. So basically I took the analysis and I turned it into a much less deep version of what I wanted it to be in a 3D model, but something that will kind of show you ways to apply the type of quantitative analysis that we can do in a body of work in both Poe's, the whole thing, or in one on its own. So for the analysis itself, I went to voyanttools.org. If you're not familiar, this is where I take it off of share really fast. And I'm going to do a couple of these things in real time. If they don't work, I have screenshots, which are in there, but it's a little more fun to see otherwise. Okay, so let me share my other screen. Dun, dun, dun. All right, now we're cooking with gas. Okay, I feel like it's showing you my email. There's my family. Okay, is Buoyant Tools showing up?
Yes.
Sweet. All right. I'm just going to copy and paste the whole thing in there. Project Gutenberg is my favorite website. Okay, when you do that type of thing, this does all of the stuff that Jesse did and can do with his mind, I have to use a computer for. So this is kind of what we're looking at here. So this Buoyant Tools, as you will see, right, will give you a word cloud up here in the top left if you want. It will do concordance plots. It will do context. So here are the words. Here's the term. Here's what comes before it, what comes after it. They will give you lots of things. And then it will show you, right, you can do the reader as well. If you go into this bottom left corner, this is kind of the best place, I think, to send students and people like Calvin who are looking for this type of thing where it will go through and do that counting, right? So the top 10 or 15 or whatever it is, repeated words, I'm sorry, they're not bigger, I'll read them out, right? So door in the Raven appears 14 times. I thought nevermore would be it, right? So nevermore and chamber come in 11 times. So there's our overlap with Jesse with that word chamber, right? Raven shows up a bunch, bird, Lenore. And then if you just keep, so you can set that up where it will look at, and I don't know if it'll populate all of them right now, but you can tell it, what are the top 30 words. This is the kind of the nugget of information that I used in order to turn something into a 3D print. So Buoyant Tools will do this work for you. It doesn't teach you how to do the things themselves, but it does give you a few things to grab onto and use from there. It's not going to populate right now. That's too bad. It'll think about it for a while and we could reshare as we go. Oh, there it goes. Yay. So it gets down here, right? So one of the things is kind of interesting to do, right? This is the word that I was hoping would show up more than it does, profit, just because I think that's the thing that the speaker in the Raven screams at the Raven that I think is the most interesting for me. But to kind of get there. So what I was looking to do, I'm going to go back to my PowerPoint. Let's see if it'll just pop up. So what I was looking to do, and here comes my artistic ability when I do it by myself, right? I thought to myself, if I can get the top number of terms, I could turn those terms into a line, okay? What I was working in this case was 3D printing. Looking at 3D printing, right? We do things in layers. So your software will chop things up into little pancake stacks, and it will print those pancake stacks one on top of each other. So in my ideal world, I was going to take this idea where, this longest piece in the middle of this crappy looking Raven that I drew, right, with lines, would be exactly like this would be door. So 14 times door shows up. I was going to print door at like 14 centimeters round and then build ideally. So I could do it from this two-dimensional looking from the side, but I could not figure out in the time that I had how to make it so I could also have it be 3D and look like a Raven from a 3D perspective. So what I did is taking this idea of using those pieces, I applied it a couple different ways and turned it into, I'm going to show you this first. There we go. Let's see. Let's make it a little bigger just because we can. Okay. So this is a 3D model of a Raven. Again, I did not make the Raven. I borrowed the Raven. The other places that you go, it's called thingiverse.com. And it is a place where people can, if they feel like it, upload their projects. And some of them will do it as an STL file. And the STL files are the files that you can put into a software. This software that I'm showing on screen and I'll kind of do in real time is called Bamboo Studio, BAMBU. That's a company that does 3D printers. That's the type of 3D printer that I'm working with. Very nicely, the English department at Ohio State, when I first showed up a year ago, they gave me the funding to buy that. So it has been a joy. And I'm not super amazing at it yet, but I'm learning a little bit as we go. And I have taught a course on applied methods of digital tools in English. And this is kind of a fun way to, it's relatively easy. It looks way cooler than it is right now. It is cool, but yeah. So don't ask me questions about how to do what I do, but you can ask me other things. So as we get into, so let me really quickly stop sharing again. And just to show, so what I did, what you'll see in that picture was all of the words on it, and I'll talk about them again. Let me see how good my camera is. So I printed, so this is the 3D print of the Raven, right? And he's got, here's door, it's the biggest word, it shows up the most, and those are indented into the Raven's body itself, right? So I have chamber is next biggest and nevermore tied with that. Hilariously, bird shows up a bunch, so I wrote bird on the bird. And then Lenore, just so it was in there, it's up there. It's like lost in the tail. So that says Lenore somewhere on there. Anyways, so it turned out very cool. I really love what happened. And as I kind of think through the processes of this, right? So I have the way that I think about the 3D model itself. I have the physical object in space. And then as you'll see here, let me go back and share again, just to show you, actually, let me not share yet. Let me show you in Bamboo Studio. Okay, so make sure this is the live one. Hooray. Okay, I'm going to share that screen. Screen 2, screen 1. There we go. Okay, you should be able to see a bird and I should be able to move it. Is it moving? Okay, cool. Okay, so this is the object itself. Okay. So what's interesting is each of these as I build them, and I know I'm close on time, so scream whenever, Noah, that's okay. Each of these words that has popped up is I have to set it so that they become negative space. If you don't, it will print them as this is, right? Chamber will show up as popping out a little shelf on the thing. So you can, and either way, you know, if I got deep into the internal and external versions of the speaker in the Raven and whether or not those things are real, that could be a cool way to go. But as you get to, and you'll see all the little trees under here, these are just supports because I printed from the feet up. I have a red one too, and it stands up. See if it does it. I broke the black one, but the red one stands. So we'll do that. So when you slice it, and this is where you'll see just kind of, and I had a slide for this, but I'm just going to skip it. One of the interesting things to me that I thought of and learned when I was doing this particular process is as I 3D print poems, as I try and think about poems in relation to 3D printing, one of the main things that pops up is this idea of lines. Okay, so each of these, let me zoom in really quick. So as you look at this thing, like I said, it's sliced it, and it tells me there are 523 layers. Each of them is like 0.2 millimeters high. And I can take this, I'm going to chop off the raven's head, but I can slide down and it will show me the inside. So this layer prints this way, and I can kind of do this. So if you wanted to, you could inlay the words themselves inside of the bird. So in a more perfect world, when I have more time and get better at this type of thing, there's two things I would think of doing. One would be cross sections, right? Where I take this idea of here's that nevermore. This is what I could not do. Where if this was, I guess nevermore shows up 10 or 11 times. If this was 10 millimeters or 10 centimeters wide, then I could use it as that piece. But because I'm looking at that again, so the second thing in poetry, right, is we have these lines as the basis for which we're doing things. And the other one is just this negative space, this idea that as I look at these things, right, I can see chamber, but each of these, I don't have a good read on what it's going to look like when they come out until it comes out. I can have a relatively decent idea, but the composition process mirrors itself as well. So that was, like I said, it's a very applied version of taking what are some of the words, what are some of the numbers and the quantitative aspects of a corpus, and how could I incorporate those in something right here. So I have a physical object, right? A raven is low-hanging fruit. You know, another project could be I take those words, I print the words themselves, and then print them in size and shape where I can create a raven. But then when you can knock the raven over, it just becomes the words. So there's a lot of interesting typographic visual that, yeah, it kind of takes off from there. So asking students to just learn this thing, which is not in the scheme of things in 3D printing, it is very not difficult to figure out how to import a file, how to do this one trick, and then how to make sure that it worked. So that type of thing is, yeah, kind of what we're going for. So as I remediate things, and as Edgar Allan Poe does such a good job using these strange words that are repeated over and over. And so, I mean, that's poetry in general, but I think that Poe in particular is fun to do because having prophet, bird, nevermore, right? These words that show up more than you know, whatever it ends up being, you know, love and dove don't show up in this poem. And that's a bonus for me. And it's a really fascinating aspect of his work that allows us to remediate it, in my case, in 3D spaces. Thanks, y'all.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Calvin. I have so many questions. That's awesome. Thank you both Jesse and Calvin for bringing Poe into the 21st century in the digital age. That's awesome. It's interesting. We had a speaker earlier. He had to unfortunately leave us, but he was discussing the Raven and looking at the figure of the raven through the lens of object-oriented ontology and actor network theory, which again kind of intersects with this idea of like literally creating an object, like the raven kind of becoming this 3D model and like becoming animate and having a sort of, I don't know, a virtual reality to it. It's really fascinating. I'm also just very interested in corpus analysis. So, Calvin, if I may ask very quickly, you mentioned some websites. The one for images, it was Splash? Or...
Unsplash, UNSPLASH.
Oh, okay.
I can throw unsplash.com.
Okay.
Yep. And then they have a plus version where you can, buy fancier ones. Once in a while, they'll put something up that is perfect and I have to pay for it and it makes me sad, but I pay for it.
Yeah.
And it is, the artists do a great job where they upload. It's not like anyways, it's all under the Creative Commons license. So if you choose to give them credit, great, but they don't monetize it in any way, as far as I'm aware.
Okay. Awesome. And then thank you so much for Voyant tools. I love word clouds. I love word frequency, all that. That's awesome. And then lastly, there was another website, Thing of Universe.
Thingiverse, Thing. Yep, VER. So universe of things. And there's another one my wife had a baby 2 weeks ago, so I can't remember words. There's another one that if you Google Thingiverse itself, it will pop up. There's a few of them floating around, and you can choose to do them by 3D art, and it's called a .stl file. And there are many CAD softwares, CAD, that will allow you to just upload that for free. So Tinkercad is one that I use with my students, where I think they use Tinkercad literally in like middle school classes at this point for kids to make stuff. So you can make a little ball. Turning it into a 3D object to print is a different thing, but those files are available through Thingiverse.
Okay. Awesome. Yeah. Were there any, I have my own kind of just summation, but if anybody, any comments or questions, or Jesse and Calvin, if you want to start discoursing, please do.
I have a question for Jesse. Sorry, Alex, I beat you. I saw you unmute. So Jesse, I just want to know, like, as a poet and as a writer who can do these things with numbers, in the process of doing this with Poe's entire poetic corpus, or at least the late ones, was there anything in particular that you learned or that stuck out this particular time as an artist and as a writer that made you appreciate Poe's craft more?
That's a good question. Something that made me appreciate Poe's craft more. Well, I would say, yeah. So you touched upon how, his poems are not just like lovey-dovey type like love and dove aren't just. So the language is definitely a bit unique and maybe unusual is a good word. And that was something I could appreciate. I was expecting more common words, and when I removed the stop words, I was expecting more of that as well to be removed. So he really knows how to play with language. That's definitely something I learned, and I already knew that, but now I know it from a quantitative perspective. And it's just very impressive. It's a shame, we lost him young, but I think of like what could he have created, The Raven is a wonderful poem, as you pointed out, and I can't help but imagine what else might have been lurking in his head, had he lived longer. But I would say the ability to look at it from a more quantitative perspective and appreciate his use of language stuck out to me, whereas before I had only considered his poems from a qualitative lens.
Briefly, I'm from the qualitative side for sure. Bit of a Luddite. But I was wondering, related to your point about applying quantitative analysis to these stories, and regarding Poe, unfortunately passing young, and what could have been. I know The Lighthouse, I believe, is one of the very last stories that he created. Is there any work being done parsing through the text of that fragmentary story? Have there been any are there any clues in the text? I don't know if it's quite like, say, Dickens's last novel, where people have theories as to who killed Trude. Anyway, that's a minor point, but I was just curious what you thought about that.
Anything that I've done or anything in general that I'm aware of?
Just anything in general that you're aware of, or if that's even something that you think is possible with that story, or if it's too fragmentary in nature.
Well, I have to be honest, I'm not familiar with that story, but I'm not familiar with anything being done with it. In fact, I'm not familiar with anybody working with his works in general the way I have. I'm familiar with other people working in different ways, but quantitative ways with other poetry, but not Poe's.
Okay. Well, nevertheless, it's an incredibly fascinating talk from you, Jesse, as well as Calvin. It's very enlightening and fascinating, and
Oh, thank
appreciate
you.
the resources that you both mentioned.
Yeah, I saw perhaps a unique connection between the two of our presentations, and I really appreciate what you had to say, Calvin. Using 3D printing is something that I admire. It's something that I I watch videos on for fun, so I appreciate that, but I have no idea how to do it. So I admire you.
Yep, I suggest trying it just because I mean, once you do it, it's like poetry. Like I just think about it all the time. Like, oh yeah, I'd lose the top to some stupid pen that I have, and I'm like, I should just 3D print that. Like, you become that person really quickly. So if you do ever try it, like it seems much scarier than it really is, and YouTube is my best friend at this point.
I look forward to your collaboration, as Calvin alluded to.
Oh yes, yeah. If you want to collaborate, more than welcome. I'll put my email in the chat.
Yeah, when I was again like curating these panels, I saw both of yours and I was like, ooh, like something like cyber or like digital, would be really cool. Because I mean, I would have never thought to do this with Poe. I'm more again kind of a Luddite. I just, I look at the text, I just kind of experiment with the words, right? This whole digital remediation and statistical analysis is beyond what I could do. I'm actually very grateful for, well, both of you for sharing these resources, because I do have a student who works with 3D printing. So definitely recommend these resources. And I'll have to show this this part of the presentation soon, because I think he'll really like it. But yeah, we started off the semester with the Raven, and I mean, I'll be teaching it again next semester, but so now it's like, oh, okay, kind of have a more cutting edge, kind of innovative approach to it, as opposed to just like the, you know, typical psychoanalytical, kind of angles. But yeah, digital humanities is where it's at right now. So I'm glad to see these kind of reimaginings of it. Yeah, and like I said, word frequency corpus analysis is something I would love to get more into. It's going to take some training, but yeah, I was at a conference this past summer, and they did a corpus analysis of Dracula, and they were looking at genre and generic conventions. So they were looking at like, I think they designed, it was like, they identified like a bunch of different genres. So like adventure, romance, gothic, seafaring novel, and like kind of coordinating the words in order to determine like statistically what does Dracula qualify as in terms of his genre based on this analysis. Very, very fascinating. I love seeing the map, or not maps, but graphs and all that. So thank you both again for also like for sharing it, but also like Calvin, you were doing it kind of like live. That was really cool. So yeah, awesome.